Coming up, Joel Embiid wills the Sixers past the Cavs. This is a Locked On Game to Game NBA.
Every game, every team, every angle. Locked On Game to Game, your team every day.
Welcome in, everybody. You are listening to Locked On Game to Game. Local experts joining us to break down all of the biggest stories on the hardwood. I'm your host, Daniella Burce, and thank you for making Locked On Game to Game your first listen every single weekday. The Cavs could not slow down Joel Embiid on Wednesday, who scored 36 points to go with 18 rebounds as Philly won in Cleveland. Locked On Cavs recaps the matchup between two of the top teams in the East.
Chris Manning here, Locked On Cavs podcast. After the Cavs lose to the Philadelphia 76ers, this effectively ends the Cavs' hopes of maybe getting to the top three of the East. They are now 4 games back of Philly and don't own the tiebreaker. You should feel interesting if you're Cleveland coming out of this one. On one hand, you lose. Philly's offense was executing at a high level. You couldn't really stop them as much as you would have liked. You also feel like Evan Mobley really acquitted himself well. You feel like Karis LeVert showed up in a big way. Felt like a really good game from Darius Garland. And this game was close with Donovan Mitchell not really playing well, maybe hampered by that finger injury. And you also should probably, based on what they just said post-game, feel a little bit annoyed that Joel Embiid was not called for a 6 foul, forced 12 to go in the game when he pushed off of Evan Mobley. Pretty clear that they all thought that was a charge. Seems like it should have been a charge. Maybe that changes the game, but they lost. They get Washington on Friday, and now feel like they are going to be the 4 seed and he's locked into that spot, probably getting New York or Brooklyn in round 1. For full breakdown of this game and everything else, Cleveland Cavaliers Locked On Cavs podcast is available wherever you get your podcasts.
The Memphis Grizzlies hope to get Ja Morant back on the court after this weekend, but for now, they're still without their star point guard and got blown out by the Heat in Miami last night. Locked On Grizzlies and Locked On Heat have both sides of the lopsided final.
I guess after a good run of good luck, the Grizzlies were due for a stinker, and that's exactly what happened, at least defensively, in Miami against the Miami Heat. Memphis falls. I am Joe Mullinax of Locked On Grizzlies, and to be fair, Jaren Jackson Jr. had a pretty dominant evening, really strong on the glass, really impressive as a scorer of the basketball, 25 points on 15 shots. That's nothing to shake a stick at. But the Grizzlies defense uncharacteristically fails them against the Heat. Miami tagged their way in the paint, shot at will extremely efficiently. Just a really impressive performance from Bam Adebayo and company. The Miami Heat certainly outplayed Memphis in this one, but there were some things to be optimistic about. Zaire Williams showing signs of life, signs of confidence that has desperately been missing. Luke Kennard making 4 threes in the fourth quarter. Who knew we had a good three-point shooter? It's not like he's given those chances earlier in the games, but that's a topic for Locked On Grizzlies.
Miami scored a season-high 138 points, taking on the Memphis Grizzlies on Wednesday, leading to the rare blowout win to gain ground in the Eastern Conference standings. I'm David Ramil, the host of Locked On Heat. The Grizzlies had won 3 straight, but were shorthanded on Wednesday, still without Ja Morant, of course, and Steven Adams. And Desmond Bane was ejected early in the second half after he was assessed a flagrant 2 foul in the third quarter. But that still hasn't meant much for Miami, who has played in nearly 40 games, decided by 5 points or less this season. Still, the Heat did something they rarely do, which is take advantage of the opportunity and shot over 40% from 3 for a second consecutive game. Miami looked to attack the Grizzlies' top-rated defense early, dropping 62 points in the paint versus a team that allows the fewest paint points in the league, which in turn opened up the outside shooting, nearly 45% from 3. Bam Adebayo was spectacular with 26 points, and Jimmy Butler added 23 without playing in the fourth quarter at all. 6 players scored in double digits tonight, and a 21-point victory, just their 8th by double digits this season. Miami now stands 2 games back of Brooklyn for the 6th seed and 3 games back of the 5th seeded Knicks. A big win tonight as both New York teams will be in Miami for crucial games next week. For a full recap of tonight's game and to keep watch of the Eastern Conference standings, make sure to subscribe to Locked On Heat.
Coming up, the Lakers drop one they just couldn't afford to lose. This is Locked On Game to Game NBA. Have you ever dreamed of becoming an NBA general manager? If you answered yes, I've got the perfect game for you. It's called Ultimate Pro Basketball GM. You get to manage every strategic aspect of your team, including hiring the right coaches and assistants, trading and training players, making draft picks, and navigating your franchise through free agency and the draft, and of course, all of the ups and downs that come with an NBA season. Locked On NBA Game to Game listeners get 100% free boost to their franchise when they use the promo code Locked On in the game store. So make sure that you check that out. To download this game, visit probasketballgm.com and scan the code or look it up on the app stores. That's probasketballgm.com. Welcome back to Locked On Game to Game NBA. I'm your host, Daniella Burce, and thanks again for making Locked On your first listen every weekday. The Celtics and Timberwolves went back and forth in Minnesota on Wednesday, but Boston was able to hold off Minnesota in the final minutes. After the road win, Locked On Celtics recaps the victory, and Locked On Wolves explains a home defeat.
It wasn't pretty, but the Celtics survived in Minnesota behind Jaylen Brown's 35. I'm John Corrales of the Locked On Celtics podcast. I actually liked how this game went for the Celtics. I didn't like the way they played necessarily, but I like that they faced this adversity again and that they at least figured out how to close this game out because it was starting to trend towards another blown lead and maybe another collapse. Minnesota did the Boston Celtics a favor by missing a ton. The officials did the Celtics a favor by missing Grant Williams, stealing the tip at the end. But hey, sometimes you got to get a little lucky to win the game. Jaylen Brown, awesome, 35 points, another awesome game from him. Timely plays from Marcus Smart down the stretch, some good defensive plays there. Grant Williams finally gets some playing time and rewards the Celtics, not with a great game, but with the big play with the offensive rebound at the end. All in all, is it the best performance the Celtics are going to put forth? No. Minnesota was tough, but the Celtics held on, and it's at least a building block for the Celtics to get back on track.
The frustrating close late losses continue to mount for the Minnesota Timberwolves. I'm Ben Beacon, host of the Locked On Wolves podcast. Timberwolves lost the Boston Celtics by just 2 on Wednesday night, a game that was highlighted by Anthony Edwards' fantastic game, 28, 10 and 7, 10 and 20, shooting 5 made threes, but marred by some spotty, we'll call it spotty at best, officiating down the stretch in this game. The Timberwolves had a jump ball stolen by Al Horford with under 3 seconds to go. Joe Mazzulla, the Celtics head coach, in Chris Finch's coaching box, tried to call a timeout, didn't get the timeout, didn't get a technical. Anthony Edwards and Kyle Anderson ejected in the final seconds of this game. However, the Wolves did a great job defensively on Jason Tatum, forcing him to shoot 4 of 16 from the floor, missed all 8 of his three-point attempts, but he shot 16 free throws in this game. Jaylen Brown had 35 of his own. We'll break down both sides of the floor because the Wolves actually played really well in this game and deserved to be in it down the stretch. We'll break down the officiating, all of it on the postgame podcast. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Wolves for all things Timberwolves.
The Warriors and the Clippers went into Wednesday night's matchup tied for the number 5 seed in the Western Conference. With playoff positioning on the line, Locked On Warriors goes over the final from LA.
Stephen Curry scores 50 points, but it's not enough as Golden State Warriors' road struggles continue. I'm Cyrus Satsas with your Locked On Warriors Locked On Now recap of the Golden State Warriors. Despite 50 points from Stephen Curry, drop yet another road game, this time to the LA Clippers, as the Warriors drop the first of a 5-game road trip that could largely determine where the Warriors end up when the postseason begins. The discrepancy for the Warriors defense, which remains the biggest problem in terms of how solid they are at home and how much they struggle on the road with points given up, is the biggest discrepancy in the NBA in over 70 years. And the Warriors are now 0-2 when Steph scores 50 or more points this season. We're breaking it all down on Locked On Warriors. Follow the program on Twitter at Locked On Dubs.
And that's going to do it for this edition of Locked On Game to Game. Thank you so much for making Locked On your first listen every weekday. Make sure you subscribe to Locked On NBA and your team's Locked On podcast. You can subscribe on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast. I'm Daniella Burce, and this has been Locked On Game to Game.